Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive into a business story that's less about just sales figures and more about the gravitational pull of success itself. We're talking about the rise, the dominance, and then the strategic reckoning of Intel. I mean, if you followed the tech world in the 90s, the early 2000s, this company was basically the invisible engine running the world. They had near total dominance. But here's the twist. Our sources detail how even a firm with such deep, entrenched advantages can be forced to, fundamentally change its identity when the technological tides turn. That's the mission today.
And it's a great mission. For you, the listener, the goal here is to really extract the key strategic lessons. This is so much more than a history lesson. It's an analysis of why competitive advantage is, well, never permanent. We're dissecting three crucial concepts: how a company uses platform leadership to build its kingdom, how controlling the entire supply chain can actually become a constraint, and the devastating cost of strategic blind spots.
Failing to see the next big thing right in front of
Yeah,
you.
exactly.
So let's start at the beginning. The pillars of their success. You can't talk about Intel's early dominance without, of course, their incredible innovation in semiconductor design. But we know it wasn't just about technical superiority, right? There was a secret strategic sauce.
There was. And it comes down to what we call platform leadership. Intel didn't just manufacture the microprocessors that powered the PC revolution and, the early internet servers. They dictated the rules of the road for the entire computing industry.
Right. I remember hearing Wintel all the time back then. That combination of Windows and Intel,
Yeah.
it was like an unassailable fortress.
It was. They controlled the underlying architecture, the compatibility standards.
Mm.
And this meant that every software developer, every hardware manufacturer,
So anyone building motherboards or peripherals.
everyone, and even you, the end user, were all aligned around Intel's technology. They built an entire ecosystem, not just a product.
And when you control the platform, you instantly create those powerful feedback loops that business strategists, they obsess over.
Precisely. That ecosystem generated exceptionally strong network effects. The more people bought Intel-based PCs.
The more valuable it was for developers to write applications specifically for the Intel architecture.
You got it. This created immense scale, reinforced their market position, and it dramatically increased the switching costs for anyone, any customer or manufacturer, considering a competitor like AMD.
So strategic control was one massive pillar. What about the operational structure they used to guarantee they had the better product?
That brings us to their second crucial pillar, vertical integration. They combined the chip design, that's the complex intellectual property of the brains, with the advanced semiconductor manufacturing. The muscle really needed to physically produce those chips.
Okay, but wait, if vertical integration was such a huge advantage, why didn't every chip maker do it? What was the catch?
That's a critical question. And the catch is the astronomical capital investment required. For Intel, though, the benefits outweigh the risk, at least initially. Controlling both design and manufacturing gave them superior control over performance, over quality. They could optimize the whole production process for their specific design, protecting their IP at every step.
And they needed that tight control to maintain what the sources call process technology leadership. How did they sort of weaponize their manufacturing to fend off rivals?
They turned it into a constant, aggressive arms race. This is where Moore's Law wasn't just a prediction, it was Intel's corporate strategy.
The idea that the number of transistors on a chip doubles roughly every 2 years.
Right, and they drove this with the famous tick-tock model. They'd alternate between shrinking the process node, that's the tick, making transistors smaller, and then releasing a new microarchitecture, the tock.
So being first to, say, the 65 nanometer process meant their chips were just inherently faster and used less power than a competitor stuck at 90 nanometers.
Absolutely. Not just faster chips, but better manufacturing yields, lower cost per chip over time, a sustained, measurable performance cap.
Yeah.
And maintaining this pace required continuous, huge investment in R&D and those enormous capital-intensive facilities we call fabs.
And these aren't just factories, are they?
Oh, no. They are multi-billion-dollar, hyper-precise, clean-room cathedrals. The investment required just to keep the capability running is astronomical. And that continuous spending created these impossibly high financial barriers to entry.
So if you wanted to compete in the late 90s, you didn't just need a good design team. You needed tens of billions of dollars ready to pour into manufacturing.
A massive wall. It kept rivals out and sustained Intel's leadership for decades.
Okay, let's transition because this is where the story gets really interesting. It's one thing to admire how high they built the wall, but walls are only effective until the battleground moves entirely. The external environment started to diverge sharply from that established PC model.
That's the crux of it. In the late 21st century, computing diversified radically. We saw the explosive growth of mobile devices, smartphones, tablets, and the huge move toward cloud computing.
In these new markets, they didn't want what the PC market wanted, did they?
Not at all. They created demand for fundamentally different types of silicon. The key metric shifted from pure, raw performance like clock speed to efficiency.
Right.
The market needed highly energy-efficient chips. It needed complex system-on-chip designs, optimized for low power. I mean, their V8 engine was incredible, but suddenly the market cared more about battery life.
If they were so advanced, why couldn't they just make a smaller version of their chip for the iPhone? Was the technical barrier really that high?
The technical challenge was significant, yes. Their architecture, by '86, was not optimized for low power. The market was captured by the rival ARM architecture, which is just better suited for batteries. But the deeper reason they missed this, it's really encapsulated in the concept of the strategic blind spot. I mean, Intel recognized the mobile trend. They invested in projects like Atom, but they failed to prioritize it effectively because of, well, organizational inertia.
That sounds like a polite way of saying we were making too much money somewhere else.
That's exactly right. The profit margins on their high-performance PC and server chips were astronomical. The mobile market, especially early on, demanded cheaper chips with much tighter profit margins. Intel's whole leadership structure was designed to maximize returns from that legacy business. Investing heavily in a low-margin, high-risk new market, it felt like cannibalizing their golden goose.
So their own incredible success made them deaf to a quiet shift that ended up redefining the entire industry. And this even started to happen in the data center, which was their stronghold.
Yes, even enterprise customers started demanding highly specialized solutions. They wanted performance, per watt, and scalability. Customers like Google and Amazon needed silicon optimized for their specific cloud workloads, which led to the rise of custom silicon and specialized accelerators.
So Intel's one-size-fits-all CPU monopoly was fracturing.
It was. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, you realize that while Intel was dealing with these external market shifts, something equally disruptive was happening inside the chip industry itself.
Which just accelerated their challenge.
A massive parallel shift. While Intel was still all in on its vertically integrated model, its competitors were rapidly adopting the fabless model.
Walk us through that again. It sounds like the logical opposite of Intel's whole strategy.
It is. The fabless model means rivals like Qualcomm, Nvidia, and eventually even AMD focused purely on chip design, the high-value IP, and they outsourced all the complex, expensive manufacturing to specialized foundries.
Mostly TSMC in Taiwan.
Primarily.
Yeah.
And the irony here is just striking. That vertical integration, that control over everything that was once Intel's greatest strength, suddenly became a massive constraint.
Oh, huge anchor.
Exactly. The fabless model let competitors eliminating massive capital risk. No need to spend billions on fabs. And crucially, it gave them flexibility. They could access the absolute cutting edge of manufacturing by simply choosing the best foundry partner, no matter who developed the tech.
Meanwhile, Intel, still trying to do it all themselves, started facing internal challenges.
They did. Our sources document significant, highly publicized manufacturing delays and process challenges, especially moving to the 10-nanometer process node. They struggled to hit those manufacturing milestones, the tick in their tick-tock strategy, at the pace the market expected.
So they're trying to build everything themselves, but the internal struggles meant they couldn't deliver performance improvements when the market needed them most.
And that weakened their traditional advantage. Because their rivals were using these cutting-edge external foundries, those competitors who were now incredibly agile were able to close the performance gap.
Or even beat Intel in certain segments.
Or even exceed them. The time-to-market advantage that Intel had weaponized for decades was just dissolving.
So what does this all mean for a firm of that size? The pressures were intense, the challenge was existential, but the sources frame the response as a necessary period of strategic reassessment. Painful, but necessary.
This adaptation is the most compelling part of the story. They couldn't just keep doing what they were doing. They had to shift away from core, decades-old assumptions.
What was the most dramatic shift they made?
I think the first, most painful reversal was in manufacturing. They moved away from that strict vertical integration toward a more flexible approach. The sources call it a manufacturing hybrid model. This involved the firm becoming increasingly open to using external foundries for certain product lines, alongside their own internal production.
Just think about the organizational pain in that decision. It's like admitting the system you built your entire empire on isn't enough anymore.
It must have required some brutal internal conversations.
And it wasn't just about how they made things. They had to totally change what they were making.
Correct. They couldn't rely solely on the PC and server CPU anymore. They dramatically expanded their product focus beyond traditional CPUs toward a much broader portfolio of computing technologies. It's a reflection of the reality that future growth depends on diversified computing workloads, not one single dominant product.
And I see heavy investment in specific areas mentioned.
Yes, they poured substantial investment into specialized data center solutions. They're building artificial intelligence accelerators for machine learning, dedicated graphics processing units, or GPUs, to compete with Nvidia, and strengthening their connectivity portfolio.
They're hedging their bets.
Deliberately, recognizing that future leadership means dominating many microsegments, not just the general CPU market.
And this leads to their final, really fascinating strategic move. One that takes that original liability, their massive manufacturing infrastructure, and tries to turn it back into an asset.
They decided to monetize that capability. They're repositioning the firm as a provider of semiconductor manufacturing services to external customers, Intel Foundry Services, or IFS. It's an attempt to take their decades of expertise and the fact that they have to spend billions on fabs anyway and turn it into a whole new revenue stream.
So after all this organizational drama and strategic reversal, what's the big lesson here?
Well, Intel's story really demonstrates the absolute limits of platform dominance when the market conditions fundamentally shift. It illustrates the concept of dynamic capabilities, the ability of an organization to sense threats and reconfigure itself. The lesson is that sustained success requires constantly questioning your core assumptions, even if those assumptions were the very reason you won in the first place.
And from a governance perspective, the source material really highlights that these strategic choices, around investment and market prioritization, they have incredibly long-term consequences. They're almost impossible to reverse quickly. The firm is still a major player, absolutely, but it operates in a far more contested, far more complex landscape than the one it shaped in the 1990s. Intel's experience shows that you can't just rely on economies of scale or technical excellence if you fail to see the emerging markets right on your periphery. It was that low-margin, energy-efficient mobile market that exposed their weakness. So here's something for you to mull over. If you were leading a dominant firm today, whether it's in software, energy, manufacturing, what market shift that currently looks too small, too unprofitable, or too technically demanding would you actively invest in today just to avoid a strategic blind spot 5 years down the line? Think about that as you process everything we've unpacked.